Welcome back to Aim and Practice. I'm your host, Jess Reynolds, and in today's episode, we are joined by Marie Claire, and she is a practitioner of dance movement therapy. So in this episode, we're going to explore this multifaceted world of healing through dance. Now, I have to admit, I know next to nothing. In fact, I would say pretty much nothing about dance therapy. So today's chat was incredibly enlightening and a true privilege for me to learn from someone who is so knowledgeable. Today we delve into what drew Marie Claire into dance movement therapy in the first place and her path from classical training to embracing dance as a healing modality. We're going to discuss the challenges and of course the breakthroughs in adopting dance therapy, not just as a practice, but as a way of life. We're also going to cover some specific methodologies Marie Claire uses, including the principles behind dance movement therapy and how to integrate it with modern psychological practices. And Marie Claire is also going to share some insights into this transformative experience that she undergoes with her clients as they transform. And we're also going to talk about the practical applications of dance therapy in everyday life. How can non-dancers incorporate elements of this therapy into their daily routines? And we'll also discuss the scientific backing for movement as a tool for mental and, of course, physical health. And lastly, Marie Claire is going to offer advice for professionals in the wellness and therapeutic fields on how to utilize aspects of dance movement therapy in their work, regardless of their specialization. So with that, let's jump in. Alright, so before we jump into today's episode, I want to chat about switching to a new EMR system. Now, our podcast partner Jane knows it can feel like an overwhelming process to switch EMRs. But while sticking with your current software might feel less daunting, moving to the right software, well, it can have a ton of benefits. So here are 3 things to consider before making this switch. Engage your team. Initiating early discussions with your team is important for addressing questions and concerns and ensuring that everyone is aligned with the goals of the move. Assess the resources. Explore software that offers onboarding resources for a variety of learning styles to help your team feel comfortable with the new workflows at their own pace. And evaluate technical support. Consider the level of support that the software offers. Is it unlimited? Can you get help on weekends? Are there any added costs after onboarding? If you're interested in learning more, book a personalized demo at jane.app/switch. And if you decide to make the switch, don't forget to use the code AIM1MO at sign up to receive a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. All right, well, Marie Claire, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation for a number of reasons. I mean, one, as we were talking about before we jumped in, was you and I we've bumped into each other and we vaguely know each other, but we've never actually had a chance to sit down and have a conversation. So like on a personal level, I'm just stoked to get to chat with you. But then on another level, looking into what you do as a practitioner, sort of, dance movement therapy and authentic movement, I'm really curious and excited about this. I've had one experience doing dance movement therapy. It was at this retreat, and the host of the retreat was a movement therapist or a dance therapist. And at the beginning of one day, she's like, okay, everybody, we're going to do these individual dance routines, and you're going to do groups of 4, and you're going to come up with this routine, and it's supposed to embody what you hope to get out of the day. And I look around the room, and like everybody in the room is like, oh, there was like this collective groan as everybody's like, I don't want to do this. But everybody did it, right? And it was great. It was fun. Everybody was having a good time. But what I found so cool about it is at the end of the workshop, there was sort of a wrap up, like, hey, everybody, let's talk about what you really enjoyed from this workshop. And funnily enough, a huge percentage of the participants were like, you know what, I enjoyed the dance part. Even though pretty much everybody at the moment was like, I don't want to do this. I'm uncomfortable. I don't want to. After going through the process, there was this like, wow, like this gratitude for that experience. So that's my limited experience with what you do. So yeah. So with that being said, I'm quite curious for yourself. What got you into this? What drew you into the world of dance and movement and using it as the tool that you do?
Great question. And I want to just comment on that story first, if I may. I just love it. I love it because I just know that experience. Like I have done so many workshops or, small little programs where I walk in and the word dance is mentioned and people go, oh, you see their body language shift. You see them kind of get to the back of the room. It's like this whole thing happens, and it's up to me. I mean, it's up to them as well, but it's up to me to sort of make it a comfortable enough experience that people are willing to give it a try. And it's my favorite. It's absolutely my favorite thing when I see someone who says, "Oh, you're not going to get me dancing. I'm not going to be moving." And by the end, they're laughing, they're smiling, and they're kind of moving along. And yeah. So, anyways, I can relate to that story. I appreciate it.
So it's not uncommon. Okay.
No, it's definitely not uncommon. The word dance throws a lot of people off. But yeah, so what got me into it? I mean, so I grew up as a formally trained dancer. I was gonna say lived at the studio. I didn't live at the studio, but I was there a lot as a child. From age 3 till age 17, I was dancing pretty consistently. And it got to a place in my life where it became kind of unhealthy for me. It was too much pressure, judgment, fear of not being good enough, body image issues, things like that. And I kind of fell out of love with it. And so as a young teenager, a 17-year-old, I quit dance, and I focused more on theater. I was in theater in my high school, and just kind of moving along with my life, and went to university, got a degree, and just kind of lived my life. And through my early 20s, I began reconnecting with dance through nightlife. That was kind of the beginning of my recognition of like, oh, dancing just feels so good. Like, it's just such a, I was never afraid to be the first on the dance floor. Didn't need to be drunk like a lot of people might feel the need for that in the nightlife. And so that, and then eventually I found my way into like conscious dance, quote unquote. I'm doing air quotes because there's a lot of different names for it. Ecstatic dance, conscious dance, intentional dance, I suppose. And so I found my way into these spaces where there was more intentionality behind the movement. And I started to have these really deep emotional experiences where I was unraveling parts of myself and emotions within myself that I think I didn't have awareness of. And I thought to myself, wow, something's happening here. Something powerful is happening. And then as that started to happen, I was working for the Boys and Girls Clubs of Calgary at the time, and working on getting some programs going that were really fulfilling. And I thought to myself, well, what if I did like a dance program that was focused on empowerment and focused on like well-being and emotions? And, so I was like, okay, what if I did this like dance for, I was working with a group of young girls, grades 5 at the time. And so I kind of had this idea forming, and around the exact same time, I had this like synchronicity of the discovery of the field of dance movement therapy. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this exists. This is a thing. Like, what? And so I was kind of forming this program of my own intuitive based knowledge, and then discovering this field and beginning to take some courses. And as soon as I took the first few intro courses in dance therapy, I was like, okay, yeah, this is it. This is my path. This is for me. Yeah, and that was 7 years ago. So
okay,
here we are. Yeah.
So I mean, a little bit of serendipity, a little bit of kind of going back to your roots. It sounds like, and a lot of just following the inner pull. That's awesome. Now, as you're describing it, what occurred to me is we're kind of jumping into this conversation talking about dance movement therapy, but maybe we should take a step back and talk about what exactly it is. Because like you said, as soon as the word dance comes up, a lot of people are like, I'm one of those people, like full on. Somebody's like, let's go dancing. I'm like, I know. I got a million things to do, right? So there's maybe a bit of baggage, a bit of stuff around this word, right? And then once we start to include it with this idea of using it as therapy, maybe some eyebrows are raising. So perhaps could we just take that little baby step back and explain for those who maybe aren't familiar, what exactly is dance movement therapy? And I suppose maybe how does it differ from traditional forms of therapy?
And I'll do my best to do the field justice in my explanation.
It's all on you. Like this is now the.
No, so I mean, to my understanding and my knowledge, dance movement therapy was birthed in the 1940s, 1950s in the US. It was birthed out of contemporary dance. So early dancers like Martha Graham and Mary Stark's White House But it started to become this blending of an understanding of the psyche and movement. And another large influence, or a large piece of the puzzle was, to my understanding again, is Jung's process of active imagination. And so Carl Jung, who is a psychologist, an early grandfather of psychology, student of Freud, friend of Freud, I suppose, and later then disconnected from Freud. But he had this process called active imagination. And active imagination was essentially taking content from dreams or from our subconscious material and being creative with it. So drawing, writing, creating music with it. And my understanding is, particularly in this lineage of authentic movement, which I can explain a little bit more later, but Mary Starks Whitehouse was an early dance movement therapist who wanted to make this process of Jung's active imagination into a corporal process, so an embodied process. And so it was this concept of taking unconscious and subconscious material and bringing it to consciousness through creative movement. So that's some of the early days. Another big pioneer in dance movement therapy, her name's Marion Chase, and she was, I believe she was a psychologist. I could be wrong on that, but she was working in psychiatric wards in the hospitals. And she was also a dancer. And so she began dancing with people in psychiatric wards. So people, and this is in the 1950s, so it's pretty, I guess, ahead of their time. And so she created some methods and some methodology around this process of dance movement therapy. So that's kind of the early beginnings. What is it now? What does it mean now? I mean, dance movement therapy is quite a vast field, I would say, particularly in the US. My understanding it is quite a bit bigger in the US, a bit smaller in Canada, but it is a large umbrella. And so some people work with dance movement therapy specifically with expressivity and movement and dance as we know it. And some people work more with dance movement therapy from a more somatic lens, from a space of slowing down and being able to stay present with our sensations and with ourselves. And so I have one teacher, Amber Elizabeth Gray, who's a wonderful, wonderful teacher and a mentor of mine. And she talks about movement on a continuum, on a continuum. And so on one end of that continuum is breath. And so breath is the original movement. If I'm breathing, I am moving, all the way to expressivity, which is dance. So all along this way from breath to dance, there's this whole continuum of movement that can happen. And this particular mentor and teacher of mine, Amber, says, if we're working with breath, we're doing dance movement therapy, because breath is one of the early, it's the first movement. So for me, I work in both landscapes, I would say. I would say more commonly, I work in a slowing down, sensory-based, embodiment, somatic-based space where we're tracking sensation, we're tracking what comes up internally as we're speaking in our practice. And then if movement makes sense to the client, then movement becomes a part of it, but only when movement feels appropriate and makes sense to the person. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. There's so many lots of curiosities popped up in that. One of the things I'm very grateful that you mentioned is the connection between Jung's work of active imagination. That's been a huge part of my own personal practice and what I do, but also what I work with my clients with. So I'm super familiar with this idea of active imagination. So hearing you say that dance movement therapy has its roots in active imagination for myself was like this big light bulb moment. Like, oh, I definitely see the connection. But one curiosity I have is, so if we take this root of active imagination, meaning we've got this sort of insight into the deeper structures of one's consciousness, right? The roots of it. And then what you were mentioning about how fundamentally breathing is a form of dance movement therapy. Like these two seemingly disparate concepts, if we were to relate the two, saying that something as simple as breathing can give us access to these deeper parts of our I guess, deeper states of consciousness, is so profound, and it's so beautiful to think that it can be that simple. That's so amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
I'm grateful for it. Yeah.
Yeah, of
And
course. Yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say like what you're describing as far as your particular method of practice, slowing down, more embodied stuff, some somatic work, right, and then opening up to the possibility, that of other forms of movement such as dance sounds pretty invitational, right? It sounds like, okay, we're going to meet the person where they're at. So
Mhm.
in that experience that you've had working with clients, this idea of somatic work, it's pretty commonly talked about. I mean, lots of people know asomatic therapists or have heard of somatic work. Soma,
Mhm.
of course, meaning body. But how does this work for you? How does getting somebody to do whatever it is, tune into the breath, slow down movements, or dance, how does that translate into uh, therapeutic effect? How do we get some sort of therapeutic outcome through the process of embodiment and somatic work, in your experience?
Mm. That's a great question with many, my brain just went into many different sections. But I want to start with the word somatic. So, as you said, the common definition that people say is, oh, it's of the body. And I like to specify a little bit more clearly somatic, and this is from Thomas Hanna, who is the person who coined the term somatic. I believe in I want to say 1960s, but I might be totally off on that date. It might be the 80s, actually. Anyways, Thomas Hanna says that somatic means the first person present tense experience of the self in the body.
The
I'm going to say it
first
again.
person
First
present
person
tense
present tense experience of the
of the
self
experience of the body, of experience of the self in the body.
in the body. Yeah. And so it's
Wow.
yeah. So it's not just of the body, it's
Hmm.
what I am experiencing now in my body. It's not what I
Hmm.
experienced yesterday, it's not what I think I might be experiencing. It's like, okay, take a breath. What is my first person I, present tense, I am experience of myself in the body? Okay, I am, there's a sense of weight in my pelvis. There's a cool sensation on my neck. And as I say that, there's shivers through my between my shoulder blades. So it's being able to really articulate what is my current moment, present tense experience of myself. The reason this is important is because so often in the helping professions in the medical field, as a client, we're told our experience of our body. We're being told that, oh, your knee is injured in this way, and oh, you're feeling that. Well, that's because of this. And we're sort of like given an experience of our body from an outside source. And so, from my perspective, I think that's a little bit disempowering. It can be disempowering. It can be helpful, of course. It can be absolutely helpful to get, an X-ray and have someone say,
Hmm.
"Hey, look, your arm's broken," right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
of course, it's helpful, but it can also be very disempowering to say, "Oh, well, I'm gonna give my experience of myself and my body over to this practitioner because they have the training and they have the knowledge, and so they probably know better than I do what I'm experiencing." But that's not
Hmm.
true. Like, no one can know your experience. No one knows your experience in the way that you do.
Yeah.
And so you asked how that translates into like a therapeutic context. And so um I'm trained as a counselor, like through my dance movement therapy education. I also got a master's degree in counseling. And so I do use, my counseling techniques and my counseling theories in my work. But the gift of dance movement therapy is it's really the gift of awareness in my perspective. It's the gift of knowing ourselves on a bodily level and empowering ourselves to be able to speak of those experiences, and to be able to connect how my emotions are showing up in my body. I often, that's kind of one of my first questions sometimes with clients is, how do you connect with your body? What is your experience of knowing that your emotions show up in your body? Just to kind of get a gauge of where they're at, because sometimes people will say, oh, I don't connect with my body at all, my body's foreign to me. But a lot of times people will say, oh, well, I noticed that when I'm anxious, I get a stomach ache, or I'm not hungry anymore, or I get tension in my shoulders, or, when I'm really sad, it usually has to do with the gut, honestly. There's a lot of those first telltale signs for people of emotions connecting through the body is, oh, my gut, my stomach tells me something, right? Which is interesting. Yeah.
As you're describing sort of the awareness people have of their body and the varying degrees of awareness, and using this sort of as an entry point into emotional sensation, right? So if we say, that's such an interesting question, sidebar, how are you feeling? We ask that like when in the bodywork world, somebody gets off of the table and they go like, oh, how are you feeling? And we just spent like an hour massaging their body or using needles or manipulating the connective tissues, right? And we ask them, how are you feeling? Like emotionally. So even in the way that we communicate with our clients, we know that there's this like deeply embedded connection between the body and the emotional state. But what I found in my experience with working with clients is there are a large percentage of people who genuinely don't have that capacity to tune into the body and even say, I feel a little bit of cold on my neck. There seems to be a fairly significant disconnect. I get clients who come in, and for them to feel something in their body, I got these climber hands. I got the clamps, and I got to squeeze with like all of my capacity before they're like, oh, I think maybe I got something. So how is that for you, right? Do you when you get clients who come in and they don't have that attunement, what are some things that you use to start to build one's capacity to tune into basics of what they're feeling in the body?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and still one that I am constantly learning, and figuring out for myself, like how do we make this process accessible for everyone? And I think that's, I mean, I want to like side tangent for a second about like evidence-based therapy, and the reason things like CBT are evidence-based is because it's replicable. You can do the exact same thing for multiple people and it's going to work out the same. It's going to yield the same results. Whereas dance movement therapy, it's just not like that. Like you can't do the exact same thing for two different bodies and yield the same results because everybody's experiences of themselves is different. And so that's part of what I love about the work is that it is really creative in being like, okay, well, how's this going to work for you, right? How are we going to get this particular person more connected to their sensations or to their experience of themselves? And so some things that we might do include some self-touch. Sometimes I'll get clients to just explore the sensations of touch in their hands. And just see what that's like. And I use a lot of props in my work as well. And so sometimes I'll get out some props. I'll get like a spiky ball and a soft blanket and, be like, okay, let's roll that on your cheek or on your, and just tune into, I often use the imagery of using awareness like a flashlight. And so like using the awareness of your mind like a flashlight. And the only thing that you are focusing on is that sensation of the fluffy blanket against your cheek or whatever it is. So touch is one way. Movement can be another way. To physically stand up and stretch in space. And sometimes, we'll start by saying, and this is from some of my teachers as well, Hannah and Tanis are two of my teachers, longstanding teachers. And they talk about inviting clients to move in a way that makes sense to you. So, most people can find something, right? They know how to stretch, or they know how, oh yeah, when my back gets sore, I do this. And so beginning to move in a way that makes sense to you, and then, guiding a little bit of awareness into that. Like, what do you sense in your back? Can you take a breath that leads that breath a little bit deeper into your body? Movement, breath is a big one. When we bring awareness to our breath, we're bringing awareness, we're bringing more sensation, we're bringing more activation in the body. And so one thing that's very important from my learnings in dance movement therapy is to always, if you're working with breath, to always give an opportunity for the client to meet their breath where it's at, before we try to manipulate it. And so oftentimes I see this, and I've been in spaces where breath practices, we sit down and it's like, okay, now you're taking belly breaths right now. And it can be a bit jarring, suddenly be like, oh, I'm bringing awareness and I'm manipulating my breath into this way that I rarely breathe, right? And so simply bringing awareness to the breath of just noticing, bringing the flashlight of your mind over to your breath and noticing, okay, oh, am I breathing into my neck, into my throat, into my chest? Can I feel my rib cage expanding side to side? Maybe I can feel it in my belly, prior to then manipulating and saying like, okay, now let's elongate the exhale, for example, or, deepen the breath, invite the breath deeper into the body. Yeah, those are some ways that we can invite awareness. One more that I'll mention briefly as well is sometimes some people are so cognitive and conceptual that sometimes access to the body has to come that way. And so one exercise I've done with clients is like a writing piece where we say, invite them to write, my body is, and then write, what is your body, right? And so it's kind of this writing exercise of this. It's a little bit of analysis around like how do I perceive my body and how do I inhabit my body? And I have a few prompts and a few examples of, my body is an artist. My body is a pain. My body is an athlete. My body is, beautiful, whatever it is. And so that is one sort of more conceptual way for people who really struggle with the slowing down and the embodiment piece.
As you're describing all of this, the word that keeps popping up into my mind, and something that you said earlier in our conversation is well, it's awareness, right? And I've come to believe that what any of us do as practitioners, it's helpful, right? Of course, when we have somebody coming into the space, it doesn't matter if we're talking massage therapist or a yoga teacher or any of us. What we do in the treatment room, nice. But really, at the end of the day, to facilitate these more long-term sustained changes, it always boils down to bringing awareness. And it really sounds like that's at the core of starting, right? I just imagine that there's a lot more exploratory adventures one can go on once that foundational step has been made of simple awareness. What exactly are you experiencing, using that term of somatically, using first person present tense, right? And then build upon that foundation of awareness. And it also seems like the skills that you facilitate are something one can carry with them, that they can tune into throughout the day. They don't need a special set of tools that they have to buy or anything like that. That's really cool.
Yeah, one of my favorite.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say.
Please go. Yeah.
One of my favorite pieces to sort of equip, or like tools to equip folks with for that like day-to-day life, is through session and through some exploration together, discovering a movement that to them in their body is an experience of calm, regulated, sometimes empowerment if that's what they're seeking, a sense of knowing that they kind of are holding themselves, that they're with themselves, that they're present with themselves. And so that looks different for everyone, right? And so sometimes it's a little bit of swaying, sometimes it's arms on the chest, hands on the chest. Sometimes it's just a sense of reorienting the pelvis and kind of tucking the pelvis and leaning into the heels a little bit more for some people, of like grounding themselves through the roots, through the bottom of their heel. And then once we've discovered that, I say, now this is something you can do anytime. You can do this when you're waiting in line at the grocery store, when you're doing your dishes, anytime that you start to catch yourself in this mental activity, which we all experience, you have this tool of saying, oh, if I just tilt my pelvis slightly, take a breath, or place my hands on my chest, take a breath. There's something here that lets me know I'm here and I'm with myself. And so that's one of those daily tools that I think can be so helpful for people.
I'm really, really grateful you brought that up. And as you were describing it, I was thinking about how much I appreciate any of the somatic modalities, be it whatever it is. Because one thing that I've noticed, pretty much all of these types of embodied practices have in common is starting from a place of resource. Just beginning everything with just tuning into something that feels resourcing, something that feels nourishing. And what I'm thinking is, and this has been something I've been quite passionate about for some time, is that little snippet right there that you just described. I believe that should be day one education cross modality. My genuine belief is chiro or naturopath or whatever, if every single practitioner were to out there were to start with just a moment of resourcing with their client, the change that can happen from that point. Even today, starting our conversation, you come in and you're a bit frazzled. Imagine how many people are coming to the individual's clinic, right? And they've just been fighting traffic, or they've had a fight with their significant other, or blah 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 blah. To start from a place of resource is so healing. So again, I'm very grateful that you brought that up, and I think that's a tool that virtually everybody could, and in my opinion, should start to incorporate into their practice. One of the things you were saying earlier, which I really found cool, was working with people who are maybe having a hard time getting into it, or the embodied practice. Is starting with the question, what movement makes sense to you? And now I'm pretty confident that my mind is taking this where it doesn't necessarily belong. But what came up next is this idea of authentic movement. What makes sense to me? That feels like, okay, well, I'm going to move in a way that just feels authentically me, right? So is that it, or what exactly is this idea of authentic movement? Is it the same as that? What's with this modality or this practice?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because I will nerd out on this all day.
Dive in.
Yeah. So authentic movement is, so the words authentic movement, sometimes you'll ask people, oh, have you done authentic movement before? And they'll say, well, yeah, I've moved authentically. Like I think I know what that is, but it's actually a practice and a discipline that has the title of capital A, capital M, authentic movement. And so this practice was founded by, or created by, Janet Adler, who was a student of Mary Starks Whitehouse, who I mentioned earlier, an early dance movement therapist. And Mary Starks Whitehouse, she called the practice movement in depth. And when she was doing it, it was a practice between a therapist and a client. So it was a therapeutic modality wherein the client was the mover and the therapist was the witness. Janet Adler came along, was a student of Mary's, and she coined the term authentic movement and essentially translated it into a layperson's practice. So anyone could sort of practice this modality. But the foundations of the practice are that there are a mover and a witness. There's always a witness in authentic movement. The mover is moving with eyes closed. So it's a closed eyes consciousness, which is different than our eyes open consciousness. And the mover is being asked to move from a space of sensory impulse. So tuning into sensation and perhaps asking the question, what must I do? What must I do? What is this longing inside me to move? That's the mover. The witness is eyes open, sitting off to the side, sometimes standing, and they are seeing the mover with the intention, to the best of their ability, suspending their projections, interpretations, and judgment. And so the witness's role is to stay present with themselves while seeing the mover. And so Janet Adler would speak about the witness is coming from a space of longing to see clearly. So it's a longing within me to see you with no filters, with none of my projections, interpretations, and judgments that I typically am going to see the world with, because that's kind of just how our mind works. And so it's a contemplative practice. It's a meditative practice. It's a mystical practice. A lot can happen within these spaces. And so when you asked, moving in a way that makes sense to you, yeah, that might be a prompt. That might be an early prompt for someone who's beginning the practice of authentic movement, is to, close your eyes and move in a way that makes sense to you. However, it really is from this space of following an internal longing, an internal impulse of, what must I do? What is within me that must move? And that becomes more clear with time and with practice. Yeah.
I really appreciate how there's two parts to this. I didn't know that there was two distinct roles required for authentic movement. And as you're describing it, what I found fascinating was each role is therapeutic. Like I can envision the mover would require quite a bit of, well, again, awareness and insight, and also like genuine work in order to be able to tap into that question, what must I do? So there's
Mhm,
a lot, I'm sure, that comes out of that. But then also,
mhm.
as the witnesser, the things one must do cognitive and emotionally in order to sort of get out of those three, what were those three things again?
Interpretations, projections, and judgments.
Right, yeah. To get rid of interpretations, judgments in particular, but to get
Mhm,
rid of them, like, ha, right? So that simply that practice of moving into a space of what sounds like complete openness, again, profoundly
mhm,
therapeutic. So that's really cool
mhm.
that we have
Yeah.
a two-part modality. So as a
Mhm.
practitioner, when you're working with somebody, do you do this one-on-one, or do you more facilitate groups, or how does that work as a practitioner?
Yeah, so currently in my practice, I don't often use authentic movement with my clients. I think I have two clients that I've used authentic movement with, mainly because it requires a level of self observation that is, how do I put it? It requires an ability to stay present in the observing self, which
Hmm.
isn't always the case right off the bat, particularly with people who are, experiencing emotional challenges or difficulties. But what I do use it in is I do teach the practice. So I teach authentic movement. I teach introductory workshops to people who are interested. And then we have a peer group in Calgary. So we have a small peer group that gathers once a month and we move together as movers and as witnesses. I would love to get to a space where it is an offering that I can offer individually. I'm just not quite there yet. I want to continue to practice and be in my space as a mover and a witness um, a little bit more to get real. And I've
Hmm.
been doing it for 8 years, but I still feel really the practice feels so precious to me, and so uh, precious and like something to be honored, something to be really held with like a high level of honor. And so I don't want to jump into a space of um offering it before I feel totally ready to do
Yeah.
this as an individual offering. But I do think I'm close. Yeah. But
I mean,
it would be
that's pretty admirable.
thanks. Yeah.
I think a lot of people they pick a modality. I'm guilty of this, and a lot of us are. Is pick a modality and whatever it might be, find an interest in it, and then start doing it without the full preparation. There's good things that could come from that, sure, but I from hearing your story, finding that point in which your embodied self is like, yeah, I'm ready for this. I'm ready for this. Seems
Mm-hmm.
to me that in such a precious and sacred practice, that's like that's the first move, right? That's the first part of
Mm-hmm.
it. Hmm.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
I mean, I just love the space I'm in now because with our group in Calgary, so my primary teacher, her name is Val Campbell, and she's not a dance movement therapist. She's actually a theater artist and a theater professor. And so authentic movement is often used in conjunction with theater and performance arts as a means of discovering material and creating content or creating characters. I know people use it in clowning as well as a way to sort of go into the depths of subconscious and collective subconscious and pull material from that space. However, I use it more personally as a contemplative practice, as a way to better know myself and to better understand my subconscious material. But Val Campbell, so she was my primary teacher, and for many years I helped her organize introductory workshops for people in the city. And then she moved away several years ago, I think 5 years ago or something like that. And at the time, I had the email list for the peer group, and I said, I'm going to keep going with this, and slowly began teaching my own workshops. And again, I do have training in it through my dance movement therapy training as well. I've taken a couple courses and had other perspectives and teachings. And I actually had a chance during my graduate studies to interview the founder of the practice, Janet Adler, who I mentioned earlier, and she passed away this past summer. So she just passed away, and I want to say July, it might have been June, but she was profound presence. Like she just was a wonderful, wonderful human, and yeah, I had a chance to interview her through my graduate studies, and I'm just so grateful for that experience and the connection that I was able to share with her, where she she began her work early on, working with children with autism and being really curious about what's happening for these kids with autism and how she could provide clear seeing for them as a means for them to better see themselves. And, in my career, I began working with children with autism. When I mentioned starting dance movement therapy, that was what I was doing. I was teaching dance to kids with autism. And so it was just really neat to have this connection with her and to really like understand in depth, like where that seed of an idea may have come from through the observation of children with autism who maybe don't have an observing self and who require that external observing self to say, oh, I'm here, I matter, I'm seen by someone else. Yeah.
Right. There's a curiosity I'm finding myself drawn to when it comes to your own individual practice. One thing that you mentioned is you use authentic movement in yourself to sort of work through some of your deeper processes. Can you help me understand how that unfolds? Part of the work that I do is, I do hypnotherapy, which is great, and so we use language and we use a lot of symbolism through storytelling. So that's a big part of it, and that makes complete sense. Like I can easily grasp connecting with deep aspects of self through something like storytelling or something like the hypnotherapy process. Can you help me understand how movement gives one access to these deeper aspects of self, and how that kind of translates into a greater degree of, say, emotional awareness?
Yeah. I feel like there's a lot I could say here. But I would say, so the first thing I'll start with is, again, something that I've learned through my teachers, and particularly Val Campbell would say, within the practice of authentic movement, there's these kind of three sections that kind of happen. There's the entry section, there's the arrival, and then there's the portal that she talks about. So the entry is sort of often, and it is linear, but it's not. They're not mutually exclusive. You don't need to begin with the entry, but typically that is where we're going to begin. Entry is that moment of I close my eyes and I tune into sensation, and I need to stretch. Okay, there's some stretching happening, and and then this happens. And then the arrival is when suddenly I am more present with what is happening to me, and there's this combining of what I am doing and what is happening to me. So there's the meeting of moving and being moved. So something starts to happen, something starts to shift, where suddenly from within, it's no longer a conscious process of, my shoulder's sore, and so this is how I'm going to move. It's this really hard to describe experience where suddenly something from within is happening, and my hand is doing this movement, and this movement turns into this movement, turns into suddenly I'm reflecting on, my relationship with my mother, and, there's something happening here that just happens. And then portal, which is what Val describes, is something that is a little bit more, again, in that mystical realm, where there's an understanding of entering a mystery and entering more of a collective subconscious space. I would say that myself, I've only ever had portal experiences like maybe twice in my movement. Once it was this like really deep sense of like this ancestral healing that was happening. This it's hard to describe, but it felt like this like I was experiencing something that many women have experienced through centuries, and this fear that I was experiencing through my movement that was coming up and through my, my belly and my chest. It didn't feel like it was necessarily mine. So it was a little bit more mystical, where it's like something bigger is happening here. And so that's where sort of that like portal piece starts to happen. So that's one thing I'll say. The second piece is, how is it helpful? I think is kind of what you said, like, how is it helpful for us for healing? Is that sort of it?
Yeah.
Ish. Was this piece of it's the action of being seen in my authenticity and being seen without judgment. And so oftentimes when people will begin the practice, there's a self-consciousness that starts to come in, where it's like, oh, well, I can't do that because that's too weird. Someone will think it's weird, or, what will they think? right? And so it's through the practice of moving and testing those boundaries and doing that thing that you're like a little uncomfortable with, and then opening your eyes and seeing your witness who's looking at you with a benevolent gaze, who has no judgment, no projections, no interpretations. And there's this internalizing of, oh, it's okay. What I've done is okay. That expression I just made is allowed, right? And so to me, it can be profoundly healing because if we think of our early development and childhood, and I believe this is Dr. Gabor Mate who talks about how we often will push aside our authenticity in favor of connection. So if my authenticity is getting in the way of my attachment, then I'm going to push my authenticity to the side so that I can remain connected, because that's more crucial to my survival as an infant, right? So if I have an expression of an emotion, perhaps, that my parent or my caregiver says, that's bad, that's wrong, go to your room, you're not allowed to scream like that, that's not appropriate, then I learned that being loud and expressive in my emotion is not appropriate. And so I stifle that down. So through the practice, it's this like relearning where the witness can sort of represent this, as Winnicott says, the good enough parent, the good enough caregiver that is able to say to you non-verbally through eye contact that, yes, your expression is welcome here. And yes, your authenticity is allowed, even if it's loud, even if it's ugly, even if it's messy. And so that's where the healing comes in, is because of my external witness providing benevolence and compassion through all of my expression, I then internalize that experience of it's okay. It's okay. And Janet Adler, the founder of the practice, she had this way of saying, she would in the interview I had with her, and in a few times I've seen her speak, she says, of course, darling. Of course, darling. And she kind of talks to herself as darling, like, it's okay. Of course, darling. It's okay. Of course you're upset. Of course you're, hurting, and it's okay. So it's kind of this reorganizing within where we learn to find more acceptance for ourselves.
Wow. I mean, I want to dig even deeper into this idea, but I'm also aware of the time. So I think what I would like to do is, no, I wouldn't like to stop the conversation, but I'm going to shift the gears a little bit because I want to be conscious of your schedule. And if you're open to it, I would like to explore one last thing, and it could be super brief. But a large portion of the people listening, they are manual therapists, and many of which I'm sure have had clients who come in and treat them like counselors, or something that's very common is clients have an emotional release, we call it, on the table, right? So is there anything that you can think of through your experience with dance movement, or any of the somatic or body practices, or any of the modalities that you practice, that might be helpful or useful for a manual therapist, a body worker who's not trained in counseling and who's not trained in any type of somatic or body therapy, something that they can bring with them, either to increase their own confidence capacity or to help clients, feel more comfortable in these what are oftentimes deeply therapeutic environments?
Well, a big thing that I want to share is being able to increase our capacity to simply be with that emotion or that experience that person is sharing, without necessarily having to fix or offer a solution or say, oh, but at least, provide a silver lining, or, we don't need to offer much usually. If anything, we need to offer less and more presence, right? More of a capacity to, let's say a client's crying, right? And it's like they're offering you their sadness, and you're holding out your hands and you're able to simply hold it, right? I don't need to bundle it up and say, oh, it's okay, and give it back, or like, oh, let me make this bright and shiny for you because I know it hurts, or oh, but look at this piece that's actually really good about the situation. It's just able to sit there and say, I see you, and I have the capacity to breathe with you and to acknowledge that there's suffering here, and we can just be with it. And so with that, I would say that's one big part of it. Another part that's helpful to remember, and this comes from authentic movement from the perspective of the witness, is that I can never know your experience. The only thing that I can know is my experience of being with you. So, what is my embodied experience of being in your presence? And if that means that my client's crying and I feel touched by that, I might share, like, I feel tightness in my heart as you talk about this. I can't imagine what that must be. Or, any kind of words that we want to offer. From my perspective, the most helpful words we can offer are, I hear you, I see you, I can't imagine that experience. I can only imagine because I don't know your experience, right?
Yeah.
But the big one is to expand our own capacity to just be still with that person in their suffering, which is hard. Like, it can be really hard. I find myself, I had a friend recently go through a really tragic loss, and we were connecting, and she was telling me about her experience, and I was tearing up, and, we were sharing in this really deep grief of hers. And I caught myself. I wanted to say, but at least you were there. But at least, at least you're financially secure, whatever it was that I had this like desire to say, but at least, but I bit my tongue, and I did this, I just held. I took a breath and I tried to just be with her. I did my best to simply be present, because typically when people are suffering or experiencing a large emotional process, that's what they want, is they want to be seen, and they just want someone to be with them in that experience without trying to change it.
I think that's doable and beautiful. So thank you very much for that sharing. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's one question that I try and ask everybody, which can be just one sentence, and it's, what, in your experience and opinion, both as a practitioner and an experiencer of receiving multiple therapies, what exactly do you think it takes to be a successful practitioner?
Oof. Good question. I mean, I do think it takes, there's a lot of elements. There's a lot of elements. And what does success mean to you, right? That's the other question, is like, successful meaning making a ton of money, or successful meaning having a large impact on the clients that you serve. To me, I think successful is more about the impact on the clients that I serve. Making a comfortable living is also helpful. But I'm not in it for the millions of dollars. Successful to me, I think, to have a significant impact on our clients, we have to remain honest with ourselves, have to remain humble, work within our scope. I think that's huge. It's so, and I'm guilty of this too, where I want to be the one to help this person, but being able to say, actually, we can experiment on this together, we can explore this together, and you might find more support in this potential referral of this person who's been working for 30 years, in this field. And yeah, remaining humble, remaining honest, and remaining curious about our own development and our own healing, I think, is huge. I often say, with the word embodiment, to be embodied, in quotations, it's not an end state. You're never suddenly like, I'm here, now I'm embodied, and I'm embodied forever now. Like, no, it's a practice, right? It's something we must continuously practice. And so when it comes to our work as well as practitioners and therapists, I really do believe that continuing to practice in ourselves and to make mistakes and be like, ooh, I see how that wasn't the most ideal way to deal with that. And now I'm going to learn, or I'm going to take this extra training, or I'm going to, keep researching how to better understand myself and my own triggers and my own judgments and interpretations and projections and the ways that I am seeing the world and seeing my clients. And I'm going to keep learning how to, best be myself in whatever the field is that I work in. Yeah.
What an awesome answer. I mean, not only was it just in and of itself an awesome answer, but part of your answer, it made me so happy because that's literally why I named my podcast Aim in Practice, because as practitioners, like what a word. It's built right into what we call ourselves, people who practice. So I'm
Yeah.
so grateful that that was part of your answer, is to continue to treat it as a practice, something that we don't find ourselves at the destination, we're practicing. I love it. Thank you.
Yeah, always.
And is there anything you'd like to offer? Is there any kind of area that you feel left unexplored to its fullest, or anything else you'd like to leave the listeners with?
I mean, like I said, I feel like I could talk about authentic movement forever. That's one that I love, love,
Yeah.
love getting into with people.
Hmm.
And the philosophy behind it, and what it is exactly that we're doing. But I suppose within that, I would say that people can also find me if they're
Yeah.
interested, and like, please, yeah, I don't know how you do your show notes or whatever it is, but
Yeah.
let people know how they can find me, because
Certainly. Yeah.
I love that. It's a pretty rare, well, I wouldn't say it's rare, but oh, did I lose you?
Camera. That's
Oh,
fine.
you're
My
still there.
audio should still be here, but yeah.
Oh, okay. I was going to say that it's when people are into this kind of stuff and want to dive deep into understanding themselves somatically, or understanding how movement can support their well-being, and really like feel drawn to it. I really love when people do actually reach out to me for that, because
Hmm.
it's it's not super common, honestly, that, or it is and it isn't, but when someone is ready, when they're like, when their system, their nervous system and their body experience is ready for movement and somatic work, and then they get to experience it, it is just such a beautiful click. Like, I recently had a
Hmm.
client say to me, oh, I've seen you for 2 sessions, and it's been more supportive than however many years of therapy that I've been doing, and I've made more strides in these 2 sessions, 3 sessions, than all of this other therapy I've done. And this client was attesting it to me, and I was like, well, but I believe that it's more truly that you were ready for this work, like something within you was ready for this, and it just
Hmm.
clicked into place. And I'm happy to usher and support that path for you, and I'm so glad that it's working. But it's more a testament to like that, to the client, than it is to me, I think, anyways. And so, anyways, just to say that if someone out there is listening and is like super resonating with all the stuff I'm saying, like, to please connect with me, because that's where it can really, when there's an alignment and a synchronicity there, that's when it works really
I think
profoundly well.
I will definitely put all of your contact info in the show notes, and I can certainly see why, as you're describing, particularly authentic movement.
Mhm.
I'm seeing such I guess juice, so much things there when it comes to practicing authentic movement, and then taking both what one experiences as the mover and as the witness into the treatment room, and bringing that in as one of those tools, not to go in and practice authentic movement, but to bring the things one learns and embodies through participating in authentic movement. So I do strongly
Mhm.
encourage anybody who's got that little inkling of a voice, like, oh, this sounds kind of interesting,
Yeah.
definitely reach out. And so yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
And thank you. This has been an amazing discussion. I'm so grateful for the time we've had together. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for reaching out. I always appreciate an
Yeah.
opportunity to talk about what I'm passionate about. And again, with that awareness of like, I'm learning, I'm
Yeah.
relatively new to practice, and I'm
Yeah.
constantly learning. So, yeah. Thank you.
Beautiful. Awesome. Thank you.